There's a stereotype that sex with narcissists is fantastic, and certainly love bombing sex is introduced way too early as a way to enhance the connection. But in today's episode, Tara and I burst the bubble of the myth of great sex with narcissists. In the self-help tip, Tara's going to discuss the importance of using red light and green light as a way to promote sexual safety, but also emotional safety in our relationships.
Thank you for joining us on Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse, where we talk about strategies, tips, and tricks on navigating and recovering from narcissistic abuse. I'm your host, Dr. Kerry McAvoy, a mental health clinician with over 20 years experience and author of Love You More, a graphic inside look at my experience of a toxic relationship.
And I'm your other host, Tara Blair-Ball, certified relationship coach, abuse survivor, and author of Reclaim and Recover, Heal from Toxic Relationships with the 7-Step Guided Journal.
We're thrilled that you're here with us today. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes, and leave us a review and let us know what you think of the show.
If I get one more review that's negative, that claims the reason I stayed in the relationship was because of all the fantastic sex that I was having, I think I'll scream. So, is that a common myth that you hear, that sex with a narcissist because of the love bombing is fantastic? Let's break this down today. I know this is a topic that I have not talked about, and I don't know many people who do. So I thought maybe we might be brave and leap in here.
It's definitely a topic I've heard about. I've had multiple clients, multiple friends even, who are like, the sex was so good in the beginning and now it's not so great, and they want to get back to there, or they want to stay or take their ex back because the sex was so good at some point. And usually that some point was always in the very beginning, when that person was also so kind and respectful and loving, all of the qualities or traits that sort of dropped off when the relationship turned not healthy, pretty abusive.
Yeah. Did you see a change in your relationship?
That was not a thing in my unhealthy relationship. It is a thing that I would see in some dating relationships. I dated someone shortly after my divorce who I really saw it more as there was a really intense push to have sex really early before I was comfortable. And it was very intense, very pointed. Like, we were having dinner at his house and he was like, my bed's right there, over and over again, this like pushy pressuring, which at the time I really didn't see as a red flag, even though I'm very aware of it now. But I was in a pretty vulnerable place and just thought it was kind of cute, which is sickening to think about now. But that push to sexual intimacy too early, to the fact that it was very pushy, coercive, that kind of thing, was a big red flag. And in that relationship, that sex piece was sort of held over my head. Like, we have such good sex. You said we had such good sex. Why would you want to leave? That kind of thing.
Yeah. You know, I don't, so I'm going to this is stuff that I never shared out loud probably anywhere. The sex was never good. The sex was always bad. And it was coercive as well. And it happened way too fast. And the first time was good, but it was because it kind of featured his best ability to show up sexually, but because he didn't really have to show up the way, if he had to fully show up, he wouldn't have been able to. And I didn't know that, but it was coercive, and it certainly was. I was in a lot of conflict with myself, and now I'm looking back at it. There wasn't anything kind or good about it. It was just that he was pushing it, and it felt dangerous to me. When it happened on that first date, it felt really dangerous because it wasn't something that I wanted. In fact, I didn't want to be in his hotel room. I wanted to be waiting down in the lobby. He even pushed that for me to come wait for him to finish packing in his hotel room. And then he pushed sex onto me, and, I went along with it. But I think I think that narcissistic or other pathological personalities could be good at sex? Absolutely. I mean, anybody can get good at sex if you learn to pay attention to another person's response and how they're reacting. But I think I'd love to know what you think, Tara. I think sex is used as a weapon, certainly as a tool in these toxic relationships. And I think that it's such a vulnerable place for so many of us that we find it difficult to share with the world what happens in the inside of these relationships, how messed up this area in our relationship is. I know for me the good news was I had 31 years of a good marriage, decent marriage, and sex was good and was normal. It was a give and take. It was a safe space for the two of us to be, and we were vulnerable in that space. And I had that history, and I think that helped me to know that something was really wrong in the second relationship because the sex was so odd. It was really odd.
The sex in my first marriage, it was never good. It was never good. It never felt fulfilling. It never felt satisfying. It never felt like it was really shame-based. That was something that I remember from the very beginning. And, but I, in that relationship, waited a while to have sex. And I had already developed feelings. And I felt by that point that it didn't matter to me as much that the sex wasn't a satisfying place. I thought that was something that we could both work to improve in the relationship. But the sex remained very shame-based. And I definitely experienced it as a tool of control. Like if I did something wrong, sex would be withheld in the relationship. Sex was not very connective. I heard a lot of comments that were very judgmental about my body. There was judgment if I was too wet, things like that made it this very fraught experience that I thought of it as, I always thought it would change though. I'm like, we'll come together. This will be a good experience for us as a couple. We can learn, we can grow, we can experiment, but it was never allowed to be that way. It really was just used as I felt like a tool of control in that relationship, especially at the end.
When you say shame-based, what do you mean? Can you kind of unpack that a little bit? Like you felt ashamed or you felt, like, what do you mean?
There was definitely a lot of discomfort there. It was not allowed for us to talk about or discuss about sex in general. I was met with silence or stonewalling if I tried to bring up issues about our sex life or things I wanted to try or experience. If there were issues in the bedroom, which there were often, like erectile dysfunction, issues like that, it was not to be anything that we were allowed to talk about or discuss. It was just this, I don't know how else to describe it. It's very just shame-based, that it wasn't okay. It just wasn't okay. And yet we couldn't admit or talk about why it wasn't okay or come to solutions. It was just we're supposed to pretend that there weren't problems, and definitely not call them problems.
Yeah, now that you say that, yeah, that's exactly what was happening in ours too. My ex had significant erectile dysfunction. It's significant. I mean, it's debilitating level, and we couldn't talk about it either. It was a chronic problem. It occurred every single time, and we had to be creative. But how do you get creative when you can't talk about something, when it's so embarrassing that nobody can bring it up? It's like it is definitely not only the white elephant, but it's the white elephant dancing on the bed. I mean, it was such an issue. But here's the other issue is that I do believe he had a sexual addiction. That do I think that every person who says that has it? No, but I do believe that he was using sex as a way to handle emotions. He was excessively sexually preoccupied, excessively sexually acting out, and he was including all forms of acting out in every possible way, which meant there was no energy or interest in the relationship with me because he was sexually acting out everywhere. I mean, let's get really practical for a second. How many times can you come in a day? But only so many times you have the energy to show up that way. You're not going to do it, 20, 30, 50 times. So if it's already occurred many times in that day and then I'm interested, he's no longer interested. And the other thing is that he really wasn't interested in me anyway. I wasn't his type. He never was sexually interested in me. I missed that. And he told me in the first date that he was surprised he found me arousing at all. And I didn't hear it. And then it became a part of our relationship that he wasn't all that sexually interested in me. The sad part of it for me was this, that my first husband and I, Brad and I, connected around sex. Brad had a lot of trouble with his emotions, and so he kind of funneled his softer emotions into being sexually intimate with me. We had a very active life that way. And it was the way that I experienced intimacy with him was sexually. When he was dying, I felt like I was being doomed to a life of loneliness, like a lack of connection, because I really viewed sex as a critical part of my life that made me happy. So when I got into the second marriage and then discovered all of these problems and was, shame and acting out and betrayal and it was devastating to me. I mean, it gutted me. All the betrayals gutted me. I found myself feeling profoundly lonely and terribly embarrassed. It was so bad that at one point I was okay with it being not having sex with this person just because it was so awful. It was better not to try than to try anything at all, which he wasn't interested in anyway. But he was. I think that's what's painful to me is that he is a very good looking man, and it was hard for me to explain to people that I'm a person who's really kind of turned on by a person's personality, not by looks. But there was something about him when I looked at him, almost like his beauty affected me, not sexually, but affected me. And to have, if I could have had that come together, to have the beauty of his physicality, to have this amazing intimacy sexually, if I could experience that together, I don't know what that would have been like. It never was there, but I kind of longed for that connectedness with somebody. And because my first husband, I didn't feel as attracted to him, although we had all this incredible intimacy. So I really wanted this whole picture. And then what I got was, yeah, he's super attractive, but there's nothing intimate. And that is almost in a way a worse thing than to be intimate with somebody that may not have a perfect attraction to. I mean, I know people are like, really? You can actually be intimate with somebody you're not attracted to? Yeah, absolutely, you can. Because intimacy is really more than just, hey, getting off on someone's looks. Anyway, it was complicated. For me, this relationship was really complicated. And it was something I felt like I couldn't share with anybody. I couldn't talk about it. So when I heard this, I was reading, where did I come across this? Somebody was talking about just sexual assault inside a relationship, inside of marriages. Like, I resonated with that powerfully. And I thought, wow, you and I need to talk about this because nobody's talking about this.
Yeah, it is something that I have known people in my life who have experienced it. It is not something that I've personally experienced it in that specific way, but I have met really too many people that have experienced it and tried to discount it or minimize it, see it as, well, I offered consent at this other time. It's a real fine line to walk.
It is. There's a moment that happened where so sex was weaponized, meaning that he knew I wanted it more often than he was interested in. So then there was all sorts of this game playing and gaslighting that was happening. And there was this one time where he actually assaulted me. It was sort of like, well, you asked for it, so you got it. This is how you got it. And he hurt me. I mean, he really hurt me doing it. And I remember that I had therapy the next day and telling her about that and just feeling mortified to have your husband assault you. It's like, and yet feeling like, well, can that even happen because they're your husband? I mean, he would say things like, well, because we came from a Christian framework, well, it doesn't your spouse's body belong to you? Well, yeah, but technically no. I mean, we're two separate people. There needs to be real actual consent. And what you did was angry. You wanted to get me back to punish me. That's why you did what you did. It wasn't, there was nothing lovely in that. There was nothing loving about what happened. It was revenge is what it was. But it's a tough thing, because whenever I've shared something that has occurred around intimacy like this, physical intimacy around sex, we tend to come back to the person who experienced it and said, why didn't you do more? Like when that was happening, why didn't you get out? Why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you push them? Why didn't you done something? It's hard to explain what's happening in those moments. There's a level of shock and surrealness. You can't actually fathom this is going on. So it's hard for me because we, I think as a society, doesn't like to see vulnerability. So then we say to victims, you should reduce your vulnerability, or you should have done something different so you weren't so weak or so passive.
And I think that totally just ignores the fact that not everybody responds by fighting. Some of us run away, like we disassociate. Some of us totally freeze. That I was not sexually assaulted in my marriage, but I was sexually assaulted in other relationships. And in those cases, I just froze. I couldn't even say no or anything because I just froze, like my body was stone. And yet the experience still happened, regardless of the fact that I wasn't physically acting interested, acting anything at all. And I think that totally ignores that aspect. Or even just that the person might fawn, that they might try to smooth it over, make it better, and how incredibly vulnerable it is to be attacked in that way, and how it's such your intimacy violation of your own personal body. Someone's they're likely bigger than you. There's so much at stake, and potentially saying no or fighting back that you may not feel safe or able to do it for that reason.
Yeah, especially I was sitting here thinking about this. If you're in a relationship with somebody that you hope you can you hope you can recover, you hope that you can somehow heal and come back from, and then this happens, how do you do that? Well, the way I did it was you just don't talk about it, and you push it under the rug, and you move on, and you go on the next day and act like it didn't, and you just move on. Because if it becomes this moment, then you may further it's like unraveling. It's like literally having a sweater that has a loose knot in it. And then if you start to pull at it, that's my fear. If you start to pull at it, you're going to unravel the whole sweater. You're going to ruin the whole mess. So it's just better to sort of like try to put a knot in it, walk away, and just pretend, okay, it's done. That's past. Let's never have that happen again. I'll learn not to push. I'll learn not to ask. I learn to be a little bit more compliant, and then maybe we can heal. Maybe down the road, this person become healthy enough we can have this conversation. But we're certainly not here. We're not there now. So let's just not talk about it. That's the way I approached it. What I didn't realize was that this sweater was already unraveling. It didn't need me pulling at any. The knots were already coming undone everywhere. I just didn't see that. I kept thinking we could save this, and that my silence was part of the effort to save it. It wasn't savable. I didn't see that. It was really hard. All of that was really hard for me.
I think it comes back to that cognitive dissonance. Some of the ways we might try to resolve a cognitive dissonance would be to change our own beliefs. And that might mean starting to gaslight ourselves that it wasn't actually a lack of consent, or it wasn't actually, etc. That trying to excuse it, minimize it, because then that would help decrease the contradictory beliefs of this is a person who loves me, but this is also a person who sexually assaulted me. And if we don't view it as sexual assault, then we can sort of resolve that in our own heads. And I think in a lot of cases like that, we really can't resolve that, because those are two different realities. No matter how much we try, we can't.
Yeah, you're making another really good point. Here's another thing that I have not ever, I don't think I've actually said out loud, but I'm going to go ahead and say it here, is that 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 he had a sadistic nature, and that part of his sadism was showing up sexually. So that sex hurt. He made sure sex hurt. Every time he made sure sex hurt. And I think that a lot of us don't want to say, you know what? I think my partner's doing this on purpose. This is not a little accident. This doesn't, it doesn't repeat. If you say, if it happens every single time, and if you even said, you know, when that happens, that hurts, and then it continues to happen, there's something else going on here. And you're right. I was gaslighting myself in the sense that I didn't acknowledge that he was that was what was exciting him, was the fact that it was causing pain for me, that this was deliberate. And I guess I would hope anybody listening today is that it's important to step out and take a look, step out in the sense of like get outside of the picture and look in so that you can ask yourself these critical questions, because you may be being injured in ways that you haven't fully admitted that you're being injured. I certainly was being injured in that relationship that I couldn't look at head on because I was too ashamed. Yet I didn't own the fact that I wasn't, because I was involved, I somehow thought then I was responsible. But I wasn't making this person being hurtful. That's not my responsibility. My responsibility was to see that and to protect myself better. But if we can't see it, we can't take steps to protect ourselves better. And yeah, it probably would have forced me into this position of, okay, now what I'm going to do, you're owning the fact that this person's on purpose hurting you. That's not good. So where is that going to take you? Yeah, probably early on, I wasn't ready to have that conversation, but I think it's an important conversation to be having.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I wanted to point out that I was thinking about what you said earlier with your ex not finding you attractive, that you knew that, as well as abusing sex, pornography, that kind of thing. That was actually something I discovered at the end of my first marriage, is that he had been abusing pornography. And I too knew that he didn't necessarily find me attractive. And I knew that from the comments he would make about other women's bodies, that he seemed to highlight features of other women's bodies that I didn't have. And I came into that relationship feeling like an ugly duckling. I had never been all that cute. And then I had sort of discovered cuteness, I guess, when I was around 23. And I really hadn't adjusted to what that meant for me, feeling cute and that kind of thing. And he was perceived by many people as seeming very attractive. Like I would compare him to like a Kennedy, a good old Irish Catholic boy. And then a lot of people have that perception of him, like this politician good looks, you know what I mean? And I constantly found myself telling myself like, oh, how amazing is it that someone like him finds me attractive, chooses to be with me. And that immediately put us at odds in terms of who had more power in the relationship. And yeah, it really impacted what I allowed to have happen in that relationship, because I felt like I was with someone that I didn't deserve, that was better or more superior than me based on just looks alone, honestly.
Well, you're hitting me right between the eyes on that one, because I did the same thing. I had us on this rating scale, and somehow I saw myself as coming in about as a 6, and he was coming in at about a 9 or a 10, and somehow I thought should be grateful for his attention. You're right. I still have to work super hard with that mindset. That's a mindset that's been ingrained in me since very young, very, very young, about value, that we earn our value, or it's because of these unique skills or abilities. So I lean into my intelligence as a great value that I bring into whatever relationship I'm in. But I fail to see that maybe that as somebody who's always struggled with my weight, that's a piece that I feel super insecure about. But here's the thing, and I think this is what we're both saying. Toxic people have an uncanny ability to know where our vulnerabilities are. They will capitalize on that because of their own shame, and they will sit on top of you in those areas to make sure that you know that you're one down. And mine, though, never name called, believe it or not, never name called. And he didn't actually even comment on my body much at all, but he found ways, subtle ways to hurt me and to let me know that I wasn't all that, whether it was just his disinterest or bragging that he never had been one to pick Barbie dolls, meaning that I wasn't a Barbie doll, or he would find ways to sort of, to let me know that I was less than, that I was less than. And but so I think what we're both saying is that bringing this out to light and knowing that a safety should make you feel loved and worthy and enough, and that if that's not happening in your relationship, then there are some issues that need to be addressed, and that's not a bad thing. That's not thing to be embarrassed about. It's just something to get help around.
I often see when I work with couples that I think we often become more aware of issues in our relationship as it pertains to what's happening in the bedroom than out of it. But bedroom issues and not bedroom issues have a lot of similarities. Can you communicate? Can you resolve differences? Can you resolve conflict? And bedroom stuff is incredibly vulnerable and intimate for a lot of us, and we don't necessarily love talking about it with ourselves or our partners. But if we're having bedroom issues, then we're having other issues that we just may not be aware of quite yet.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. In fact, Dr. David Snarf wrote the book The Passionate Marriage, and he uses sex and intimacy as a way to examine what's happening psychologically, interpersonally between couples. Is that it's a perfect metaphor. It's a perfect breeding ground for whatever is going on there. You're also having problems in the same way, but it's in a different way, but with same issues in the other parts of your arena. If you're not talking in the bedroom, you're not talking in your relationship. If you're not showing up and being mutually blessing each other, pleasuring each other, knowing how to benefit each other there, you're not doing it elsewhere either. You're right. It's a perfect mirror for what's happening in the relationship.
Yeah,
I agree. This was super uncomfortable for me to talk about. I feel really like, oh man, but I think it's critical because sex is something that narcissistic people introduce super early as a way to bond, but then it also just becomes fraught with all their difficulties because they have lots of difficulties. That means we're going to have a lot of difficulties in this arena, and I just think it's something we should be more open about. We shouldn't be so much fear or shame or hesitation.
In today's self-help tip, we're going to talk about a way that you can use traffic signals to help you in assessing how to go forward with sex or any levels of physical intimacy. As a survivor of sexual assault, when I was working with a therapist, my therapist suggested that I use red light, green light in assessing if I wanted to move forward with doing something or to stop. So, for example, if my partner wanted to ask me if we wanted to kiss, I would have to think in my head of a stoplight. And would I put a red light on that as in absolutely not do? Would I want to put a yellow light as in caution, maybe discuss more, or green light as in I'm ready to go? And that was a way for me to assess physically as well as to check in mentally with where am I at in this process? Does it feel too soon? Should I maybe have a conversation with this person more? Do I need to take a break, come back to it in the future? It really helped me get more present, check in more with my body before committing to something that I may not be okay with.
That's a great idea. I love that. And it's really helpful because it forces you to have to identify in a signal, almost like an example with where you're at emotionally, put those two together. And I know for most of the time for myself, I don't do that. It's usually after the fact when I'm reflecting back that I have like, oh, I really wasn't, that may have, if I could have done it in the moment, that probably was a yellow light, maybe even turning red, and I just didn't pay attention. So I love this because it forces you to have to be more aware, more intentional about it.
I think I found the most difficult part of it is that if I was a yellow light, that means I had to talk about it. I had another therapist actually tell me that if I can't talk about some aspect of sex, that I shouldn't be doing it. And to be able to start to have conversations about, oh, I would like this, or I would not like this, or this would be pleasurable to me, or this would not be, really made it a possibility for me to approach sex in a more honest, more communicative, vulnerable way.
That's powerful. Love that. Wow. I love that. That's great. No, I've not heard, I've heard of the term, but I've never heard anyone describe the exercise. I love it. It's really rich. It's great. It's a great one.
Kerry and I know and totally understand that sex is an uncomfortable topic for many of us. But after listening to today's episode, did you find it particularly relevant to you and your experience in your potentially narcissistic, unhealthy, toxic, and/or abusive relationship? And what do you think about the choice of choosing to approach sex more carefully by applying the red light, green light idea? You can let us know by emailing us at hello@breakingfreewithkerrytara.com. If you haven't yet, make sure you follow, subscribe, write a review, and if you know someone who would benefit from this episode, please share it with them. If you're not already following us on social media, you can follow me at Tara.relationshipcoach and Kerry at Kerry McAvoy, PhD. We will see you back here next Monday, where we'll be talking about ADHD and autism vulnerabilities to abuse.